Now we're going to be moving to another discussion on the African arts and the values and the image of Africa in the diaspora. Now, Africa's story has always been told, through its arts. And, in the diaspora, these expressions take on a new meaning. So we're going to be looking at what that is all about. And joining us via Zoom this morning from the UK is Gogo Anyanwu. He's a fine artist who has produced over 400 paintings in different media and participated in solo and group art exhibitions both in the Nigeria and in the UK. Good morning and welcome to the program. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
All right, now talking about African arts, first of all, how would you describe, the core values and philosophies that traditional African art embodies?
Well, thank you very much for that question. To start with, African art over the years, right, have created value for not just the artists, but Africans, to be precise. And over the years, you see that art has evolved, African art has evolved, of course, dating back to history where, most of our African artworks were taken away to Europe and other parts of the world. And artists have consistently showcased what skills and talents, that they have. And most importantly, they have consistently showcased our culture, our heritage. And of course, most artworks are influenced by the environment where artists find themselves, especially where they were born as well. And there's several artists who have been able to do that, and the value keeps increasing, and that is making Africans, proud that the art speaks to language, speaks to culture, and most importantly, heritage. In every artwork, you could find that as well.
Now, just like you've mentioned about colonization and the likes, we know that these things disrupted African culture in one way or the other, with many of our artifacts, being misrepresented in Western museums. So I'd like to know, how has the displacement of African art and cultural objects affected the image of Africa abroad?
Well, to be honest, I mean, I would say it has affected it in a positive way, because those artifacts as well, like I said, for example, a typical example is a Festac image, which was taken from the Benin Kingdom in Nigeria. That, of course, consistently, you see it, in pictures, you see it replicated, across the world. And obviously, that hasn't also, affected the zeal in artists. If one thing that has done is bringing out, those skills and those heritage that showcases the fact that Africa is a special place. And like I said, for me, it hasn't affected, the art value or the history of art in a negative way. Rather, it has actually brought to limelight, how rich the African culture is. And that consistently, like I said, artists have shown that through their works of art.
Now, it's quite interesting to hear you say that, because for centuries, we know that African art, has always been described as either primitive or tribal or something like that, kind of moving towards the negative aspect of it. So it's quite interesting to hear you say that, it's quite positive. But don't you think that there is some form of representation when it comes to, how African art is being perceived in the Western culture?
Well, like I said, I mean, people, one thing about art is that viewers, give their own interpretation, based on what they see, all right? But one critical fact is that it doesn't take away the fact that when you see those artworks, you could tell that the artwork is coming from a particular side of the world, and which is, Africa. And a typical example is Benewo's Anyanwu, which is very interesting. When you see the sculpture work, you definitely know that this is coming from an African artist, right? And that's a lot of them, the El Natuzzi of this world, you know, whose artwork has depicted categorical Africa, the rich culture of Africa. And for me, that is not a negative thing. I mean, we know that in the past, we have clamored for the fact that there should be a repatriation of some of those artifacts, all right? But those artifacts continue to speak volume to the fact that Africa has a unique culture, and the artists also have unique skills and unique talents, which they continue to showcase. So for me, it's, yes, people view it as probably negative, but it's not a negative thing. That's actually how Africa was brought to the world, and the culture of Africa was brought to the world through art. So, and that will continue to happen. And a lot has been happening around the world where we have African artists, some of them who are based in Africa, but yet their work is resonating across the world. And the Western world is beginning to get more interested, you know, in artwork, and also interested in those artists who produce these works.
All right, now let's look at African identity in the diaspora. Now we know that, you know, millions of Africans, you know, in the diaspora usually struggle with dual identities, you know, trying to retain their African values while also, you know, adapting to the society that they find themselves in. Now, how would you say that, would you say that, you know, African art helps with reconnecting with heritage and identity, and how would you say that art helps with that generally?
Yeah, to be honest, in as much as these artists, you know, who probably may find themselves in other parts of the world, but one thing is very clear, which is what I'm proud of, that those artists, you know, first of all, identifies themselves as Africans, and in every of their work, you see that, you know, image of Africa showcasing our culture and heritage. All right, in as much as they try to blend the fact that they reside in a particular country, right? But they continue to showcase Africa through their works. And most of the artists you find, you know, when you visit, when you attend, you know, international exhibitions, you definitely know, even before you see the name of the artist, even before you see the artist, will tell you this artist is from African descent. And that's one thing that African artists have continued to do. And most times it's actually subconscious, because I mean, it's not something that you have to put in a lot of work to do. At the same time, you want to also depict some paintings, you show some paintings or some artworks to depict the environment where you currently reside. And of course, from those exhibitions, we continue to, you know, let the world know that African art, you know, has come to stay, and it will continue to grow. And that's what artists are doing around the world, especially artists from Africa as well. Not just Africa, even artists from outside Africa also depict their culture as well. But the African culture is rich and has a lot to showcase, and will continue to do that.
Now, aside, you know, the paintings and the fine arts, you know, we see that other aspects of art, like when it comes to African music, fashion, in addition to visual arts as well, are also, you know, shaping, you know, global culture and all of that. They are going international as well. So I'd like to know, you know, how would you say that these other forms of art have impacted, you know, and changed the narrative of Africa, aside from visual art? How have these other forms of art, you know, impacted and changed the narrative of Africa in the diaspora?
Okay, great. That has been, you know, quite interesting and expressive. And I give you an example. There are several festival of arts going on around the world. I take example with the UK. For example, in Leeds, there have been Leeds International African Festival. We started in 2023, of course, which I was part of. and this is a yearly thing. Last week, Wednesday, there was an international festival of arts held in Bradford. Bradford is another city in the UK. And Bradford is known as the city of culture, all right? City of culture because there are diverse cultures in Bradford. And that African Festival of Arts was opened with performing arts, where people perform dance, especially people from South Africa, people from Zimbabwe, people from Nigeria, people from Malawi, across all the African countries. They came in showcasing different dances, different cultures, and they performed to the amazement of the audience. So this is happening on a yearly basis. And that's how the performing arts, especially, is showcased in every part of the world. Beyond the visual arts that, you could see in offices, in homes. But this International Festival of Arts, African Festival of Arts, has become a yearly thing, and the producers go all the way to bring people from Africa to come and perform and showcase our rich cultural heritage, which is something that is quite exciting, thrilling audience, people from other parts of the world. So it's something that has come to stay, and it will even get better as the years progress.
Exactly. But we also think that, despite Africa's growing influence in the arts scene, there is still issues of cultural appropriation. Some of these African arts are copied without acknowledgement or proper acknowledgement. So now, how would you say that has affected African arts, and how can Africans ensure that their arts and their values are celebrated, and also being appropriated, as it should be, without being appropriated to the global or in the global spaces?
Yeah, you're quite right. We see situations where artworks are actually replicated, printed and framed, right? And also sold to various outfits, maybe hotels and offices and all of that. One thing is very clear is that artists are beginning to be aware that these things happen. So they begin to put in place copyright, system that would be able to, reduce this to the barest minimum, if possible, eliminate it entirely. But like I said, the arts and copyright system, they are evolving, and artists are becoming aware and conscious of the fact that their works are replicated. And of course, even when people try to, reproduce a particular art, be it visual art or the performing art, right? You also find that it's never the same like the original producers. So that is the consciousness that artists are beginning to, imbibe, to make sure that some of these things are checked and, if possible, eliminated. So the copyright system, which artists are beginning to put in place, in no distant time, will begin to eliminate this sort of, will I call it, faking the original artworks and the performing arts as well. So that is what artists are beginning to ensure that doesn't happen. And over time, in no distant time, like I said, that will be eliminated.
All right. Now, earlier on, we spoke about how, most colonialism and slavery, took most of the African arts to, the Western countries. And we know that, museums around Europe and America still hold thousands of these African artifacts. And, this has sparked calls for things like restitution and bringing back these artifacts to where they, belong originally. So now, do you believe that the return of these African artifacts from the Western museums will impact how Africa is valued in the diaspora? Do you think it would change anything, or, what's your view on that?
Well, in as much as I believe that those artifacts and artworks should actually go back to Africa where they were taken from, all right? But for me, it's not going to impact much. The impact won't be much in terms of the awareness that the African arts, has been able to create, all right? Because everyone is aware that these artifacts, most of them were taken away from Africa. But like I said, that is another way of inspiring artists to continue to produce these artworks, more of the artwork, different kinds of, media and all of that. And even if those artworks are returned, which of course I agree they should, but the impact on how African art is viewed won't be much because, like I said earlier, the awareness is, increasing day by day. More artists, are being trained. New artists are coming up, and that brings to fore different kinds of skills, talents, style of painting, style of sculpture, all right, and style of any particular art at all. So again, yes, it's important to bring back these artworks, but the impact won't be much at all because the awareness will continue to grow. And the fact artists are beginning to, make sure that these artworks by going to exhibitions across the world. I know young artists who have, continued to do almost 4 exhibitions in a year, not just in Africa, outside Africa, and they travel the world to showcase, our rich culture and heritage through either the visual arts or the performing arts.
Now, speaking on the issue of dual identity. Now we know that many young Africans in the diaspora grow up in that environment. Most of them have never been back home, so they don't really understand the African value in in the true context of it. So, in your opinion, how do you think that African communities in the diaspora, particularly for those who were born there and been there all their lives, how can they preserve these African cultural values so that the younger people or the younger ones coming up can also understand what Africa is about and also still pass on that African values to their children and their generations unborn?
Absolutely. It's a point that I'm very passionate about, letting our children know about our culture and heritage. To be honest, here in the UK, there are several communities. You have the Nigerian community, for example, in Leeds, Nigerian community in Bradford, Nigerian community in Liverpool. And what have we been doing? On a monthly basis, we come together, talk about our culture. We also have a group of people who teach the young ones, the children, those under 10, those under 20, how to speak their language, all right? And in the international festivals I talked about, is also, there is room where children are brought together and everybody discusses about the culture. And people are beginning to be conscious about it, because if we don't do that, you find the situation that in the next 20 years, a lot of people won't even know, what their culture is about. They know that they're from Nigeria, they know that they're from Ghana, for example, but they don't know anything about their culture. One of the things I'm doing as a person is to teach children and young people art. And each time I've been doing that since 2022, before we start, we discuss about the culture of every participant in the workshop that I do, getting them aware of the culture, getting them conscious of the fact that when they go back home, they will ask their parents some silent questions, And one of the things that the Leeds International African Festival started doing, and of course by next year that will be very obvious, is talking about our roots and heritage. A committee has been formed that is going to, by next year, we should be able to showcase, pick one item of one aspect of the culture. For example, rites of passage. People know that burials go on. For example, people know that there's traditional marriage before you go on to the white wedding. But a lot of the young ones don't know what goes on to those ceremonies, that there is every stage of the ceremony, which is quite rich in our culture. So that's what the diasporans are beginning to do by, creating these hubs of community. So in the Nigerian community, for example, in Leeds, there are several other ethnic groups, under that community, and they come together to begin to enlighten the young ones to know about our culture, know about some of the arts and the artists, and that's one thing that is happening now, which I'm very proud of and happy that over time, in the next 10 years, a lot of our children and the young ones will be aware of their culture and where they come from.
Right. Now, let's look at, the role of African governments and, institutions. Do you think that they are doing enough when it comes to, promoting African arts in its entirety, both the visual arts and other forms of art as well in the global scene? Do you think they are doing enough? And do you also think that, these artworks and these performances, music and everything, do you think it is something that can benefit Africa in terms of the economy and other, aspects of, in African society?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, first things first, I don't think the government is doing enough, or the governments across Africa, they're doing enough. First thing for me is, establish those good museums back home. For example, they have the National Council for Arts and Culture. They also have Arts Council here in the UK. I want to see a collaboration between countries, because in every country they have, in Africa, they have National Council for Arts and Culture. But first of all, we need to, back home, there are several museums that require updating, refurbishment and all of that. And of course, the tourist attraction back home, I don't think the government has done anything about it. Before government can even make sure that create the awareness about art and culture, the rich cultural heritage of Africa, first of all, they need to fix our museums, fix tourist attractions. We have a lot of them back home. For example, in Nigeria, where I come from, there's so many of them, but the last time people heard about these places probably in the 80s, and a bit early 90s. But they need to fix those museums, art centers. Those are tourist attractions. And when visitors come there to see what's happening, then you find a situation where somebody would actually write, say, we need to have a collaboration between the National Council for Arts and Culture in Nigeria or Ghana or in South Africa, for example, and that of the UK and that of the US. That's the only way governments can actually do better in what they're doing now. I don't think they're doing enough, and I think it's time that they started, fixing those tourist attraction centers back home in different African countries. And I can assure you, in Nigeria, for example, that so many of them that, if you go to Enugu, the art museum there is not as exciting as it should be. You go to Lagos, yes, you could find some of them, but they're not well taken care of. And until they do that, they won't be able to attract those Western visitors who come, those who travel a lot, and before they will be able to have that collaboration. So first of all, fix those art centers, fix those cultural centers, then you begin to attract that recognition from the Western world, and collaborations will be easy and seamless.
All right, thank you so much, Gogo Anyao, for this conversation. I mean, I had a wonderful time, very enlightening. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Save Nature TV, news in your pocket.